will be live in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
We're live.
You're on mute, Fareed.
I'll start over again. Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Toronto Seniors Housing Corporation Board of Directors meeting. My name is Fareed Amin, and I have the privilege of serving as the chair of this committee. On today's agenda, we will be discussing a number of issues, including seeking approval from the board on the tenant human rights policy. We will also be discussing and hopefully approving the enterprise risk management policy. We'll have a closed session, after which we will go back into the public realm and report on those discussions. We have no deputations today, so we will try and get through the agenda as quickly as we can. I would like to acknowledge that today, November the 24th, is United Nations Day. It is the anniversary of the founding of the United Nations Charter in 1945. October the 24th is also Shemini Atzeret, which is celebrated in many Canadian Jewish communities. And tomorrow, October the 25th, is Simchat Torah, which marks the end of the Sukkot festival. I should also mention, and I think we didn't mention this before, but October is also Islamic History Month, and there are a number of institutions and organizations across this great city celebrating the contributions of Muslims to the to Canada and beyond. As many of you know, we have a couple of vacant positions on the Toronto Seniors Housing Corporation board, the first being a tenant director position. This vacancy is from the recent passing of our beloved director, Maureen Clohesi, and some of us were at the celebration of Maureen's life today. It was held at her building, and myself and Tom had the opportunity to extend on behalf of the board and the leadership team and indeed all the staff of the Toronto Seniors Housing Corporation our sincere condolences, and we spoke and heard about Maureen's tremendous contribution to the work that we do and as a tenant advocate. We also know that Paul Rattis resigned from his position as a deputy city manager, and that is the second vacant positions that we have. We are working with the city to try and fill these positions, and hopefully we'll have an update on this agenda item at our next meeting. So with that, I'll proceed with the land and African ancestral acknowledgement. Toronto Seniors Housing Corporation acknowledges that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is served by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. And now for the African ancestral acknowledgement, Toronto Seniors Housing Corporation acknowledges that all treaty peoples, including those who came here as settlers, as migrants either in this generation or in generations past, those of us who came here involuntarily, particularly those brought to these lands as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. We pay tribute to those ancestors of African origin and descent. Just a housekeeping, I'm getting a lot of feedback, so I'm not sure where it's coming from. So perhaps if we can mute, unless you're speaking, that might help. Thanks, it's much better now. Okay, so we'll move to item number 3, which is the approval of the public agenda. Are there any amendments to today's agenda? Okay, hearing none. May I ask someone to move that the agenda be adopted? Councillor Crisanti moved, seconded by Lawrence. All in favor? That is approved. With all in favor, be it resolved that the October 24th, 2024 public meeting agenda of the board is approved as presented. We will now proceed to item number 4, which is a conflict of interest. So I will ask, is there any conflict of interest? Okay, hearing none, if something arises during the course of the meeting, I will encourage the member to bring it up and we'll deal with it at that point in time. So we'll now move on to item number 5, which is an update from the CEO. So Tom, I invite you to present your update.
Yes, thank you, and to the chair, to the board. I guess we had the board meeting last week, so I don't have a great deal of further update, but I did want to share with you I guess really the outcome of the submission of our report and presentation at the ECDC committee yesterday, and just reminding the board members that that report was provided to council in the presentation as a follow-up to a motion out of our annual general meeting to provide council, the committees or ECDC, with an update of the application of the integrated service model into all 3 of our 83 buildings, and as well highlighting aspects around program and partnerships, and then kind of specifically with some of those city partnerships, which was named in the motion, Toronto Public Health and Parks, Forestry and Recreation. And I just, would like to share that I think the session went very well with the committee. We had spoken to the various divisions and debriefed with several individuals about the report and the presentation. So I think it had been very kind of well received even before going to the committee. And there were some very, very good questions that were asked about about our work. And just really, if I can summarize what when I shared the report with the board last week, for its approval before going to the Committee of Council, what we really wanted to share was the specific innovations that had been identified through the integrated service model and how we were performing. What was the data? What was the key performance indicators that helped to illustrate that we were on track with the work that we were doing for Toronto seniors? And I do feel confident and just want to share with the board that in so many areas we have made really, really good traction in terms of addressing the mandate from the city as it relates to the integrated service model. And the one important note from that meeting was that a motion was put forward by Councillor Paula Fletcher, and it was carried. So I'll just read out that motion for the board. The Economic and Community Development Committee requests the Deputy City Manager, Community and Social Services, to report to the April 8th, 2025 meeting of Economic and Community Development Committee on the work plans of Parks, Forestry and Recreation, Toronto Public Health, Social Development, Finance Administration, Service Seniors and Long-Term Care to support Toronto Seniors Housing Corporation and any programmatic budget matters that may be required to advance programs to seniors in 2025. And so I certainly know from the staff perspective that motion was very well received, and knowing that we have the opportunity now to work more with those divisions, and certainly the councillor expressed that she was optimistic that the city's divisions would be and could be more involved in terms of supporting tenants in our seniors building. So we will, kind of diligently work with the Deputy City Manager, Community and Social Services, and those other divisions and in preparation for the April meeting around, what potential programming or supports and those divisions provide to Toronto seniors. So that certainly was I think very favorable outcome for Toronto seniors housing. And then just my final note is that this is officially Liz Dizzig's last board meeting. So Liz, we've kind of wished you well, but I think this is kind of from a governance perspective, the final farewell. So thank you for all your work.
Thanks, Tom. And I do want to also recognize and thanks to Councillor Crisanti for being part of that discussion yesterday. I think it was very instructive to have you there, Councillor, and have your support and have your question as well. So I appreciate that. And I want to recognize our Deputy Mayors with us. Councillor Deputy Mayor Morley, it's always good to see you. So thanks for coming. And Tom, I was going to ask that maybe it's maybe helpful to the board if you were to circulate those slides that you presented at the committee yesterday. That might give the members a sense of the innovations that you spoke about. And I think the motion expressed by the councillor regarding the extension of city programs into Toronto Seniors Housing Corporation building, I think was well received, and I look forward to sort of having that that update sometime in the new year. Any questions for Tom from any of the members of the board? Okay, thank you. Seeing none, we'll move on to now deal with the tenant human rights policy. So Grant, over to you, my friend.
I'm on the line now. It's Warren.
Thank you very much, Warren. Welcome. I'm glad you can join us. I know you're out of town, so appreciate you taking the time to join us as well.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay. Grant, go ahead.
Thank you, Fareed, and good afternoon, everybody. Before you today, for consideration of the board for approval, is our tenant human rights policy. I just want to provide the board with a little bit of background on the development of this policy, and then we'll take any questions. So the policy itself is intended to reinforce TSHC's commitment to creating and maintaining an environment that is free from harassment and discrimination. The policy is to help provide a framework to address inquiries, requests, and complaints. This particular project, and with me today on the meeting, is one of our business consultants, Ayushman Banerjee. And Ayushman brought this to the Corporate Governance and HR Committee a couple of weeks ago. TSHC initiated this project in about October of 2023, so about a year ago. And a number of steps have taken place over the last year to bring forward what you are considering today. We did a jurisdictional scan. Initially, we also had conversations with Toronto Community Housing and some of the work they've been doing in this area. We reviewed the Ontario Human Rights Code. Ultimately, as we developed the content for this, we had conversations with the City of Toronto's Human Rights Office about this, the Ombudsman at the city, and several of their team on this. We went to the Senior Tenant Advisory Committee and had a couple of different conversations about this as well. The Center for Advancing the Interests of Black People at TSHC also provided us some input on this, as well as RPATH and the accessibility team. So this policy has gone through several key stakeholders to provide input onto this, and we've looked at it from the content of an original older version of a policy that was brought forward at transition and modeled on a previous TSHC policy. The policy before you lays out the principles, roles, and conditions to assess human rights complaints specifically. And also attached and included in the package is a draft of the supporting procedure that we're working on. This will be the actual process that will ultimately finalize that will be used to help process complaints. So this is a work in progress and something that will continue to be dealt with as we move forward after the policy is considered here today. Included in the package for board consideration as well is a presentation summary view of all of this that helps bring it together in a little bit more of a summarized view. And this was also presented in more detail, as I mentioned, at the Corporate Governance and HR Committee on October the 7th. One thing I wanted to note for the board is one item we wanted to amend or update the policy for consideration for approval today is we would like to include a reference to the accessibility policy in the definition sections under the duty to accommodate. This is something that we think will help strengthen the policy, and we'd like to include that for your consideration today. When the policy was discussed at CGHRC, just a couple of points. One, there was some discussion on reporting, and reporting, is something that's part of the procedural stuff. It is mentioned at some level in what you have before you, but we will come back and there will be regular reporting on this item. With that, I'll address any questions.
All right, thanks, Grant, and also thank to Ayushman for the work that you folks have done. This is a lot of heavy lifting, and we had a good discussion at the last subcommittee meeting. And I like the idea of adding that amendment to deal with accessibility and also to come back to the board with a report back from time to time. Any questions from the board? Sorry, go ahead, Lawrence.
Yeah. I have read the 2023 Ombudsman's report, his recommendations, as well as the remedial measures which TSHC took. And also I read their recently board approved policy. My question is on this. Our corporation's complaint procedure is under development. Till then, will TSHC be handling if there are any complaints?
So through the chair, and I apologize if I was looking at the wrong camera earlier. We have a different camera in the room here. We did consult with TSHC and have been monitoring progress of this item from their perspective as well, because concurrently they have been working on their policy in this space and their procedure, but they will not be handling human rights complaints for Toronto seniors housing. So it will be our own process and our own policy. So I hope that helps to clarify that. And we are also very familiar with the Ombudsman's report. We did reference it briefly in the staff report, and it was one of the considerations that we looked at as an input into the work that we brought forward here. So we have considered that, but the TSHC won't be involved in processing our complaint.
So is our solutions team in?
So through the chair. So yes, the solutions team is in place. And we do actually, just to kind of clarify, there is a tenant complaints procedure that was updated and released earlier this year. This will build upon. So the solutions team does already exist. It's part of operations. And there are other components to implementing this policy around training and communication. So there's still work to be done on this. But yes, the solutions team does exist.
All right, thanks. Thanks, Lawrence. Thanks, Ryan. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Through you, just wondering on how we are thinking about and/or tracking data related to complaints and things of that nature. You know, I think it's important for folks to be able to, for us to be able to track and ensure, of course, that we are honoring this and sort of whether it's how work orders are being completed or how tenants are being prioritized. And while, you know, it's not the socioeconomic or racial or any of those types of data wouldn't be measurable for that. But I mean, I think if we're starting to see complaints and wanting to be able to look back and track if there are any code related issues or violations taking place, how are we tracking related data or collecting even?
So going forward, our plan is to actually bring reporting back to committee and through board to give updates on reporting. We're not actually reporting on complaints at this time. So this is something that we're going to be bringing back. And in terms of how we'll actually bring it back, that is still to be determined. Although it is something that, for example, we could include in some of our dashboard reporting that we already bring forward to committee and board. So it is something that we have to still work on in terms of doing formal reporting on tenant complaints and then specifically these types of complaints too.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And, you know, there's nothing worse than when tenants say, well, this isn't getting done for me and I'm not getting consideration for the X, Y, or Z reasons. So just wanting to make sure that we're being thoughtful about how we are making sure that we're collecting and tracking that related data so that we can, you know, very clearly ensure that's never the case. But I appreciate that very much, Grant, and great work on this policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I just want to recognize that Brenda has joined us. Brenda, welcome. Jim, over to you.
Thank you. Sorry.
I just wanted to ask a question. If are there annual reviews done for each employee?
So I'm going to ask if Carol can address the performance management program and that question.
Through the chair, yes. For our management and exempt staff, we do have annual performance reviews. Jim, is there a follow-up question that you wanted to ask?
I was only asking because someone that I know personally that worked as a health promoter at TSHC said that she had never had an employee evaluation done. And I think they're very important to do, not only for us to know how the employee is doing, but for the employee to know how. So I'm glad to hear you say that we are doing them.
Yeah, thanks. So that issue, I'll leave it with the CEO and the chief HR person to address. But I think at the TSHC, that performance review, performance evaluation is done on an annual basis. So thanks, Jim. Any other question on the tenant human rights policy before I ask for a mover and a seconder? Brenda, go ahead.
Just a quick question about staff training to handle this stuff. I mean, presumably some of this is already ongoing, but is there any explicit training that's going to happen for how to implement and monitor and evaluate the human rights policy?
So maybe through the chair, I'll answer that in two parts. So from a training perspective, a training plan to support this, the implementation of this policy is still to be developed. And we envision that there will be potentially different levels of training required for different staff.
Yes, right.
But the actual training and that detail has not been confirmed at this stage, but it is a next step that is included in some of the future work that we've articulated in some of the process, for example. And then with regards to looking at the policy, we did put a review cycle on this policy that would review this policy every 3 years. However, and so we will look at the policy from the perspective of its effectiveness and some of the data that we just talked about, for example, that would be collected and reported upon. And then we can also use that in light of things like the training and bring this back in a future review for consideration of any further opportunities to improve the policy.
I appreciate that in the cycle. I'm thinking more clearly more present time, not waiting for the 3-year cycle. My experience has been you can have great policies, but if you don't have people trained in how to implement them, then it's just a piece of paper, right? And I think it's a different sort of skill set, isn't it? And some of it's a monitoring thing, documenting thing, but even in the documentation of things, there's a bit of a skill there. So could you at some point report back to us as to where you are in your training aspect? I appreciate there's different levels of staff will receive different sets of training, but I really think it's important, and I think to empower the staff to know how to implement this.
Yeah, so that through the chair, so Brenda, that certainly can be brought back. And we are looking to get the training organized by early next year. So the latter part of this year, we'll be getting ourselves sort of finalized on the procedural and then moving into the training. So we can
Great. Yeah, please. I appreciate that. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Brenda. Are there any other questions? Okay, if not, as I said, we're looking for approval of this. So can I ask that someone move that this policy be adopted and approved by the board? Deputy Mayor Morley, seconded by Brenda. All in favor? That is carried. With all in favor, be it resolved that the board approves and adopts the tenant human rights policy as presented. We'll now move to item number 7, which is the enterprise-wide risk management policy. And again, Grant, I'll ask you to quickly go through the policy, and then we'll have some questions and discussions afterwards if necessary.
Thank you, Fareed. So through the chair, before the board today is our enterprise risk management policy for consideration for approval. I'll provide a brief background on the policy. So this is part of the work that we retained MNP to help us with the development of an enterprise risk management framework. And that enterprise risk management framework includes the policy, but also includes more detailed aspects around developing a risk register and a plan associated with how to address those risks and some tools and templates, including a dashboard for risks. And those are other pieces that will be coming forward through AFRC and to board later on. But before you today is the policy. The policy itself was brought forward to the AFRC committee on October the 2nd. And was supported to move forward to board. However, there was some discussion on that AFRC about the board level responsibilities associated with the draft of the policy and to strengthen those responsibilities. So we did take back the feedback that was brought at the committee, worked with MNP and Lawrence as chair of AFRC, helped provide details on that, worked with MNP and then ultimately also with Lawrence to reflect upon board level responsibilities associated with this policy, and we enhanced and strengthened those. So you'll see the draft before you has more detail around board level responsibilities. And also just in reference to the package itself, It also includes a short presentation that provides a little bit more of the bigger picture of the enterprise risk management framework that I just spoke of, and some of the work that we're doing with MNP that will continue over the rest of this year and ultimately conclude in early 2025. And then I'll take any questions.
Yeah, thanks. Again, I think we had a really good discussion with MNP and at our last subcommittee meetings. So if there are any questions, Brenda, go ahead.
Yeah, this is just a specific query I have, and I appreciate the framework being developed. That's important. I'm looking at things like extreme weather events and its impact, of course, on our buildings, and in particular, the loss of electrical power and its impact on elevators. I personally experienced this with my son. For 3 days, he couldn't get out of his apartment because the went wonky, and actually was just as specific to the elevators. And given that all our people are seniors and all of them do need the elevators, and I do know in some the Toronto community housing buildings have been months upon months waiting for elevator repairs that sometimes didn't happen in a timely manner. So I just want to highlight that particular concern, and we might need to have something developed sooner rather than later. And if because that seems to me, you know, one of those things that we can't control. It's weather, obviously, but I think we can almost predict that it's going to happen more in the future. And I think the impact on seniors and loss of mobility within their housing and in particular elevators, if that could be in some way looked at a little sooner than the time frame that a lot of this stuff is going to be looked at. You know, it takes. I appreciate your time involved with this, but you know, my son, we had to call the fire department, who physically carried him up 3 flights of stairs out of his wheelchair, because the electric wheelchair, as you know, weighs hundreds of pounds. So I know there's many of our seniors who are mobility impaired, if not most of them. So I don't know if there's some place, whether it's here, the committee, or within management team, sooner than later, I think we might need to have to look at that as a subset. Those are my points.
Yeah, thank you, Brenda. So through the chair, if I could just provide an initial response on that. The policy before you does not address that specifically, that type of risk. However, the enterprise risk management from a framework perspective and the development of the risk register, the domains of risk, the matrix for how we assess risk and prioritize risk, those will be coming in more detailed pieces to follow on from this. So they'll have operational components, financial components, tenant-specific components, compliance, governance. A number of different risk domains are being considered there. And it's actually going through a conversation internally right now to bring forward ultimately to the AFRC at an upcoming meeting. Specific to things like elevator outages and those things that are directly impacting tenants and are significant in the more short or immediate type of frame, that is something that is dealt with as well through the emergency response, more specific plan that we have. And that emergency response plan is something that we work together with Toronto Community Housing on, because they actually provide a number of elements of the emergency response in those situations. For example, the repair is actually something dispatched through TSHC for elevators. Having said that, there's a separate project that's related to this, but not part of this, where we are working with TSHC right now on an update of the emergency response plan, which is a joint plan between the two corporations. And this, I won't go into detail here, but this is something we did speak to at a previous meeting in camera. So we can always bring that back if there's more detail that would be required of the board on emergency response.
Yeah, thanks, Grant. And I think it'd be helpful once you've get to a certain point with the TSHC on that emergency response plan for the board to take a look at it. Because as Brenda mentioned, it's the significant weather events, which is just one of those items, is occurring more frequently than we expect for a whole bunch of different reasons. And so I think it's an important consideration for us to at least be aware of what are the service standards and what are the expectations that our tenants can have when these things happen, many of which is beyond our control. But I think we need to have a plan. I did actually raise this issue, Brenda, when I had my one-on-one with MNP. And of course, it was out of scope, but I think this is a consideration that the board perhaps should be updated on once we are in a position with TSHC to do that, Grant. So I'll put that on the bring forward list, and at some point in time, we look forward to getting an update on where we are on that.
Yeah, I appreciate, because I know
Thank you.
I know you did mention at another meeting about operational updates and all that, and I believe they're generators on our elevators, but those are time limited, aren't they? And I think the thing with these, many in the private sector buildings, some of the counselors will probably know this, where elevators go down for weeks, months, and I mean, I just can't imagine what we would do in those situations, or if the weather event was so extreme that Hydro could not repair the district zone in a timely manner. And I don't even want to think about that, but
Okay.
we obviously have to.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. All righty. Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, can I get a mover and a seconder for this policy? Moved by Deputy Mayor Morley, seconded by Brenda. All in favor? That is approved. With all in favor, be it resolved that the board approves and adopts the enterprise risk management policy as presented. So we'll now move, but before we move to item number 8, which is a motion to close meeting, I know that we had a training session scheduled for board members on the anti-Black racism training, which is on November the 17th. Unfortunately, I'm not here on the 17th, but I would certainly encourage those who are there to be present. And I will certainly circle back with staff to ensure that I somehow participate and either in a subsequent session or in some other forum, because I think this is a really important and necessary training for all of us to go through to understand some of the issues and nuances associated with this, and it's certainly in keeping with the City of Toronto anti-Black racism policy as well. So I just want to mention that before we go into our closed session. All right, so item number 8. Can I get a motion to move into closed session? Sorry, Councillor Morley.
It's what?
Are you moving the motion or a point of order?
Just a quick point of order, Mr. Chair.
Sure, go ahead.
On the issue of the training, as part of a number of other roles, including police board and board of health, there is some, and of course, even just from the councillor's offices, we do similar training. So I just will follow up offline to understand if that is considered as an equivalent relevant training, or whether it's appropriate to proceed across the board. But I did just want to flag that I'm sure Councillor Crisanti or others may also have a similar experience of having been able to receive and sit through those important trainings.
That's very kind, and I'd love to participate in another session if possible. Sorry, Grant, you had your hand up?
Through the chair, it's actually for Carol. So the
Sorry,
training is actually on November 14th.
Yeah, that's what I meant,
so that's the final training for the year. Once we determine and identify who else is required to take the training and the iteration of the training, then we will roll it out again. To Councillor Moore's point, what we can do is something similar that we did for cybersecurity, in that we would then have an acknowledgement that they've taken a training that has a similar criteria, and then we can always kind of file that away as well.
So, okay, so I'll get credited for equivalent training.
Thank you.
Anyway, thanks, Carol, appreciate it. All right, so thank you very much. So we'll move into item number 8, and I need a motion to move into closed session. Deputy Mayor Morley. May I have a seconder? I can't see the entire screen anymore. Brenda, all in favor? That is approved. So we're now, be it resolved that the board closed part of the meeting to the public is approved. I'll wait until we're offline, and then we'll proceed with the closed session agenda.